In February of 2007, the second set in the Time Spiral block, Planar Chaos, came out. Whereas its predecessor, Time Spiral, was all about the past, Planar Chaos was themed around the present, and not just the now, but an alternate now that could have been.
What are we looking at here? Is it an alternate reality?
The set symbol is that of two overlapping planes, meant to symbolize an alternate reality overlapping with our own. Well, magic-wise, that is. The set's story can be experienced by reading the Planar Chaos novel, written by both Scott McGough and Timothy Sanders. It takes place immediately after the events of Time Spiral, with Teferi sacrificing his Planeswalker Spark and subsequent powers in order to seal the temporal rift above the continent of Shiv, allowing the phased-out continent to safely return to Dominaria. Noticing Teferi's weakened state, his companions, Jorah and Venser, take him to see the Shivan people known as the Gitu, adept at fire magics and artifice. The tribe assists Venser in creating a new ambulator so that he and his friends may still traverse the globe in their efforts to seal Dominaria's remaining rifts. Using this new ambulator, Jorah and Venser travel to Urborg in hopes to ask Lord Windgrace, the area's planeswalker protector, for help. Teferi is, for now, left behind in Shiv. Shortly after the pair's arrival, however, they become separated. Venser finds himself captured by Windgrace, the planeswalker having a violent disdain for technology and artifice. Meanwhile, Jorah encounters Jodah, an ageless wizard not too different from herself. The Archmage informs Jorah that he has traveled to Urborg to confront a 100-year-old psychic vampire known as the Weaver King, who, in the time before the wrathy overlay of Dominaria and subsequent Phyrexian invasion, had sworn allegiance to the Phyrexian pawn, Volrath, the then ruler of Wrath. Trapped in shadow within the stronghold that appeared on Urborg during the overlay, the Weaver King has been filling his time creating psychic connections with the island's inhabitants, influencing their actions. While sadistic and insane, the Weaver King rarely lets things go unnoticed. And this includes the arrival of Jodah and Jorah, both of whom the Shadow Vampire takes a keen interest. The pair makes their way to Lord Windgrace, but find the Panther Planeswalker less than willing to assist, as he already has his paws full protecting Urborg from the flow of Phyrexians that are appearing from the local rift. Seeking answers, Windgrace planeswalks to Shiv to seek counsel from Teferi. The Time Mage deduces that these Phyrexians are coming from an alternate timeline, possibly one in which Yawgmoth succeeds in defeating and taking over Dominaria during the time of the invasion. Lord Windgrace then takes Jorah, Venser, Jodah, and Teferi all to the Blind Eternities, basically the space between planes. There they meet with Freyalise, another of Dominaria's planeswalker protectors. She confesses to the group that not only are Phyrexians appearing near her Skyshroud forest, but an unnatural cold is beginning to set in. Despite Teferi's argument that everyone should work together to close the rifts and repel these threats, Freyalise and Windgrace decide to go their separate ways and deal with their respective rifts independently. Freyalise, however, does request assistance from Jorah. Against Jodah's objections, the Elven Planeswalker returns to Skyshroud with Jorah at her side. Windgrace then brings the rest of the group back to Urborg. In the Skyshroud forest, Freyalise shows Jorah that she has been able to temporarily take over the hive mind that controls the slivers in the area, using them as a short-term solution for beating back the Phyrexians that threaten the forest. She then confesses that she has only but a fraction of her former power, as she is growing increasingly exhausted trying to protect Skyshroud as the rift above continually saps mana from the land. Seeking additional aid, she asks Jorah if she would please venture to the Pardic Mountains region of Lataria and locate Radha, then ask her to return to Skyshroud. Reluctantly, Jorah agrees. Back in Urborg, Jodah comes up with a plan to rescue Jorah. Enlisting Venser's aid, the two use the Artificer's Ambulator to teleport to Skyshroud. As they attempt to do so, however, the Weaver King activates a psychic connection that he had established with the Urborg native's mind, and uses it to tag along. Once in Skyshroud, he makes himself known and quickly takes psychic control of both the area's Phyrexian forces as well as the Sliver's hive mind. Freyalise, knowing that her last defense for Skyshroud has been lost, decides she has no choice but to follow into Teferi's footsteps. The elven planeswalker sends the visitors back to Urborg, then pulls back into herself all of the mana and energy she had been using to protect Skyshroud. She then redirects everything directly into the temporal rift above, which greedily consumes every bit of it. By the time all is done, the rift is sealed. Freyalise, however, is no more. Back in Urborg, Lord Windgrace notices a disturbance. He knows that Freyalise is now dead, but is not afforded the opportunity to mourn, as he is busier than ever trying to desperately defend Urborg from the strength of the Weaver King-controlled Phyrexians. This is when another planeswalker, one made of silver, appears. The silver golem Karn, who has arrived at the behest of his friend Joyra, is able to convince the prideful planeswalker from Urborg to return to the table and listen to Teferi's advice. Back in Teferi's audience, they learn that the Time Mage has figured out that these alternate reality Phyrexians are largely a result of the temporal rift above the island of Talarian, where Urza's academy once stood, but that the rift has grown far too large to repair in the time since the invasion. Due to that, Karn, whose silver body allows him to safely travel through time, will need to go into the past to seal it. That said, the Talarian rift was not the priority, as the rift above Urborg was more pressing. After some discussion, Karn convinces Windgrace that he will need to attempt to close it regardless the cost. The Panther Planeswalker returns to his home island and, in preparation, channels part of himself into the land itself, stating that he will always be the protector of Urborg. He then turns his attention to the rift and focuses all he has left into closing it. Windgrace succeeds in wiping it out of existence, but he, too, fades away. Lord Windgrace apparently gone for good, the Weaver King now feels free to do as he pleases. The psychic vampire once again activates the mental link he has with the Urborg artificer, Venser. Posing as Karn, the Weaver King convinces Venser to use an amulet to travel into the Plane Eternities. The real Karn, however, rejoins the group, and Venser realizes his mistake. The artificer does planeswalk away, but not before rupturing a pair of power stones he had on him. The explosion does away with the Weaver King, and Venser's mind is once again his own. Venser then steps into the Blind Eternities with the real Karn. The two talk for a moment, then, with Venser's assistance, the Silver Golem went back in time to the point just before Baron, the grief-stricken Master Wizard of the Talarian Academy whose daughter, Hannah, had just been slain by the invading Phyrexians, was to cast his obliteration spell on the island of Talaria, wiping out everything on the island, Phyrexians and all. Calculating that he would be able to survive the catastrophic spell, Karn begins work on sealing the juvenile rift that is forming above the island as it is being destroyed. And, while the Silver Golem succeeds in sealing the rift, he feels a new darkness begin to creep into his mind. Karn reaches out through time and space, telling Venser that he regrets that he will not be able to assist with the remaining rifts. Then planeswalks randomly throughout the Blind Eternities, as to prevent anyone from following him. Back in present time, Venser, Joyra, and Teferi are once again all together in Urborg. Before the trio can figure out what to do next, though, Jeska, a planeswalker from the island of Oteria and Karn's protege, arrives and asks the group if they know where her mentor has gone. As for what happens next, that's a discussion for the future, as in Future Sight, the final chapter of the Time Spiral story. For now, though, let's stay in the present and talk about Planar Chaos as a set.
So you have to live in the now! Live in the now!
But what exactly constitutes a set based on the right now of Magic as it is taking place? It was a question that Mark Rosewater, who was on the set's design team led by Bill Rose, was trying hard to tackle.
That was the hard one. I'm like, well, it can't just be set in the present, because every set's set in the present. It can't be like, here's this neat set, just a normal set like you see every day. It had to have something about it. And that's when I stumbled upon the idea of an alternate reality present set.
The design team even briefly considered using Planar Chaos as a way to officially introduce a sixth color. It was an idea that didn't really go very far.
We've talked about a sixth color on and off. Usually, there's an article in a magazine called Inquest that no longer exists, and they had dubbed the sixth color purple. And so we always, somehow whenever we talk about sixth color, it's always purple. So we talked about doing purple. And we actually came up with an interesting way to do it. I don't want to give away how we were going to do it, because we might one day do it.
But it's through Magic the Gathering's Color Pie that Planar Chaos' designers decided to best show these alternate realities. Essentially, what would cards from Magic's past look like now had things been different either story-wise or Color Pie-wise?
Essentially what we did is we took all the mechanics and said, what if this wasn't what the color is now? What could it be? And a few things it was hard to move, but most things it's like, okay, well, what if it could be a different color? And how do you know? And it wasn't just a matter of changing things. We had to make an entire new color pie to fit. Like, if Sarah Angel was a blue thing, because in this world, Vigilance was blue. And so Sarah Angel was a blue card, except it wasn't an angel, because it's in blue, it was a Sphinx. And like, well, how would you flavor that card?
What wound up happening was each color was assigned mechanics that, while they could fit into that color, they were really supposed to be in another. Examples of this can be seen with Monetize, a white counterspell, Pongify, blue spot removal, control effects in black via Enslave, red getting bounce spells with Steam Sworter, and green gaining efficient card drawing with Harmonize. Of course, while it's all fine and dandy in a vacuum, not everything went completely to plan in the long run.
For us, it's like, hey, we're going to do this thing, it'll change Magic for a little bit, it'll be quirky, but then, then it'll go away and Magic will get back to normal. But the problem is, it fundamentally changed static Magic. Like, all of a sudden, green can now draw cards. Green normally, doesn't draw cards as simply as blue did. And all of a sudden, now it does. Or all of a sudden, red's bouncing things, or, blue's discarding, or all the things that were like a little more crusty things. And we can never take that away. It's added to Magic.
And what did they add to Magic? Well, for one, a cycle of alternate legendary creatures. Essentially a what if of a few of Magic's important past characters, such as Miri the Cursed, which shows what the Witherlight Saga-era cat warrior, Miri, would be had she not been killed after being turned into a vampire. There's also a cycle of charms, which are modal spells that, in this case, each feature an ability that its color is not supposed to have, such as Piracy Charm, a blue spell, causing a player to discard a card. Furthermore, there's a cycle of mono-colored slivers that each feature an attribute not normally associated with that color, such as Reflex Sliver, a green creature, having and granting haste. Wizards also made color-shifted reprints, each of which are functional reprints but in a different color, such as the card Prodigal Pyromancer being a red-shifted reprint of Prodigal Sorcerer. And there's more beyond that, including a new cycle of Magus creatures that, unlike the ones found in Time Spiral, which grant abilities of powerful spells in the game's past, each have the ability of a non-basic land from Magic's past, such as Magus of the Tabernacle, having the same ability as the Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale, or Magus of the Coffers, having the same ability as Cabal Coffers. Beyond all this color shifting and card reimagining, Wizards of the Coast did include one new mechanic, in addition to all of the returning mechanics like Echo, Kicker, Madness, and whatnot. This new mechanic, Vanishing, works very similar to the Fading mechanic from Nemesis, except that it uses time counters to be more consistent with the suspend cards introduced in Time Spiral and, really, just to be more mechanically intuitive than its predecessor.
So what happened was, Fading made a lot of sense. I like the idea of you got it now, but it goes away. Like the idea that it's about the present because it's not going to be here for long, so enjoy it now. But the problem was, Fading had this problem where when we had set it up originally, it didn't go away until the turn after. Like, if you couldn't remove a counter from it, it went away. What we found was it's completely non-intuitive. Why does it stick around for a turn after the last counter is removed? So we're like, okay, if we're going to do it, let's just update it. We'll call it Vanishing. We'll change the name. It'll be the exact same mechanic, but we have to get it so people play it correctly. And I believe that Vanishing had potential future, so let's fix it. As it turns out, mechanics are all downside. They're not super popular, so I'm not sure if Vanishing will come back. It might one day. It's actually a pretty awesome mechanic.
Honestly, none of the cards with Vanishing ever made that much noise in the grand scheme of things, but there were a handful of cards that are worth mentioning, starting with Aeon Chronicler, which saw a lot of play as an uncounterable card advantage machine as well as a finisher in blue control decks. The card was actually a key item in Yayame Wafotapa's 2007 Pro Tour Yokohama winning deck.
Your 2007 Pro Tour Yokohama champion winning $40,000.
His deck also featured a couple of other strong cards from Planar Chaos, such as Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth, a card that turns all lands into swamps, and still sees widespread play today across a number of formats. Extirpate, a combo deck punishment card that was a one of in the sideboard. Wafotapa's deck also included 4 copies of Damnation, which is a white to black, color shifted Wrath of God. And as for cards that did not fit into the Pro Tour winning deck, there's Detrivore, a card that was great at destroying non-basic lands at the time when Standard was riddled with them. Essence Warden, a color shifted Soul Warden that helped to breed the competitive Soul Sisters deck in Modern. And Pyrohemia, which is just a color shifted Pestilence, but became rather popular with the Commander crowd. Also, the set's pre-release card was a foil alternate art version of Oros the Avenger, and its release promo was Hedge Troll, which is a color-shifted version of the OG Magic card Sedge Troll.
Obviously, they're related.
So what are your thoughts on Planar Chaos? Is it amongst your favorite Magic the Gathering sets? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. And please remember to subscribe to Magic Untapped here on YouTube and toss a buck in our tip jar on Patreon to support more great Magic the Gathering content.